Thank you, Shahab, for being here and for your film, and also for your beautiful introduction. I'd actually like to start there, and then I'll have a few questions we can open up to the audience. But yeah, I want to start in your introduction because you mentioned that this film emerged out of your encounter with Abadan. Yeah, I'm just wondering if you can recall or just like elaborate on what that encounter was and how it played out.
Sure, yeah, thank you so much. This film is part of a larger ethnographic research that I'm doing in Khuzestan and specifically in Abadan. The research started by the question of living in that landscape. It started with some environmental issues in the region and the question of how people are experiencing that crisis. It was specifically about dust. Of course, there is a lot of history and narratives around Abadan. The city is located on an island in southwest of Iran at the border between Iran and Iraq. And this is where the first oil refinery in the Middle East in 1908 was built. So the region was in control, under control of the British Petroleum Company for about 50-something years before the nationalization of oil, and then after the revolution, the war happened there. So there is a lot of history around this place. Of course, BP archives and many films and books. But one thing that was very specific to me was when I arrived in the environment, I just noticed how the sense of this place is different than what I know. And I just give you a very simple example of the language that you would hear. For example, all the documents, all the films, everything is either in Farsi, which is the language, the official language, or if it belongs to BP, it's in English. So it came to me as a surprise, the omnipresence of Arabic language when I was in the region. And that brings you the question of ethnicity and maybe things like that started for me, and I started to think that how it's possible to think about the history of a place regardless of the stories that are around it, but with attention to the senses. This is, of course, inspired by several ethnographic research and scholarly work that exist in this field. Questions of everyday life, questions of affective charges in an environment that has unconscious impacts on people, questions of memory and embodiment of memory. That was kind of like, this would sum up my inspirations and interest in that region. And then for this film, I think work, I was looking for trajectories, and water became an important trajectory for me because the native people, their lives is bound to water, either because of the fishing industry or the palm groves and dates, the agriculture. And the palm groves are also in the proximity of the water. So this island is surrounded by 3 rivers, and in the south it goes to the sea. So alongside the rivers, the palm groves exist. So water became an important thing for me to follow, and labor or work was also perhaps one way of approaching the everyday life and the relation between people, their experience of living in a place.
Was this the structure that we see in the film, that we're following the fishing industry along its waterways? Was that something that you were pretty conscious of wanting to describe in your film when you began shooting, or did that sort of evolve fairly naturally? Yeah.
So the structure of the film definitely came after. So the whole process of shooting the film was less of a very planned production. In a way, my presence as a filmmaker was the way I could position myself among the participants. I mean, it's hard to say we were sharing labors because it's really not like even in any sense, but they were accepting my work as a labor, and I was encountering their work. So the whole process of shooting this film was somehow tapping into the rhythms of what I was encountering. And then the editing and figuring out the structure and all of that came after when I went back to my material, but I also, when I went back to Khuzestan several times, meeting the participants again, and I think probably expanding my understanding of the place, but this time without a camera. So I mean, there was a research before, there was the production, but there is also a research after that. Somehow the editing is emerging from that.
Yeah, I definitely do want to talk about your editing process, but in terms of shooting, I mean, you mentioned, or it's mentioned in the end credits that you shot the film in 2020 in the winter. So I'm curious, like, how much time you spent in each location? How much time did you spend just sort of observing and watching and getting to know the participants, and versus like how much were you shooting? I'm just curious, like in total, how much footage you amassed?
Yeah. So the shooting, like I mean, if we call it production, because again, it's not very, like clear production process, but that took about 6 weeks. But my whole presence in the region is kind of like scattered over the course of 5 years. And again, part of it before the production, part of it after the shooting, encounters with the participants. Yeah.
And how much footage did you wind up with toward the end?
I don't remember exactly, but I mean, it's for each location. It's not much more than what we have. I mean, definitely, I went back to the shrimp processing plant a few times, and but there are many other locations that are not even in the film. So going back to this idea of using the process of making film as the means of encountering a place rather than having it as, like the final goal. I have encountered so many other places, and I have them captured that are not in this film because it didn't fall into what this film can contain by itself, and that's in addition to the fact that the film, I think, also it's not containing itself even. Like there are so many things that fall out of it, and with the idea of using fragments, I'm just trying to also be honest about that the film cannot even contain what it's trying to show.
Yeah, I'm curious about that absence specifically as it like relates to the refinery that you mentioned. The image of the refinery like emerges at the start of certain chapters, and in fact is the only like I think 16mm footage that you have in the film. There are moments where it sounds like you're interviewing certain people about working at the refinery, but it is notably absent, and I understand that it is like because it doesn't follow this conceit that you established. But I am just curious how the refinery specifically sort of framed your thinking about these other locations that you were inhabiting.
The refinery, I mean, opposite to what's happening here, it's in fact quite present in Abadan. So when you're crossing the bridge to enter the city, there are like a couple of bridges that you can drive through. The refinery is the first thing that you see, and its presence, it's very strong because it occupies a huge amount of the city. It's very big, and also not only the visual, the torches, the fire that you see from afar. It's very captivating. It's also very monumental, in a sense. But it's not only the image. Also, like even the smell of the refinery, like the smoke that rises from the refinery every day. It's very present, and it's a big part of daily conversations, but again, for a group of people who are related to the oil industry. And in fact, it's quite absent in the everyday conversation and imagination of the native Arab communities. It's so absent that they don't even imagine working in it. So that absence, I think, was informing my my choice of completely keeping it out and away, and the choice of using 16mm to just this little, like fragments of the refinery is also a reference to how much it is present in the archive, and its archival presence is also very strong and monumental, and how for a big majority of people it's completely absent.
So how did your experiences or just how did your concerns shift between each section in the film? Because I would imagine they're much different than when you're, say, shooting in a trawler. I would imagine your entire production is different than towards the end when you're gaining access to the processing plant.
The whole production, we were just a team of two, again, because it was mainly the encounter, and any bigger production was a little counter purpose, with very minimal set of equipments. And again, I think the production was informed by the environment itself and the way we could tap into the rhythm of life in that space. So the trawler is, of course, this very mobile and moving and chaotic space in which it's very difficult to get, still frames, whereas the processing plant, the women sit there for, hours and hours and hours without moving. And I think the aesthetics of it also was informed with this embodied experience that they have.
Each section also just, I think, creates different constructions of the individual and the mass as it relates to work and production. How conscious of this dimension were you as you were shooting, or is that something that which you maybe alluded to earlier, that kind of emerged while you were editing the film?
I think, I'm not sure how much the film is successful in that, because what I'm trying to do is not looking at the work of, a group of people as a general thing. So in this work and also in the rest of my research and the other films that I'm working, I'm trying to bring in the subjectivity of workers. And of course, in this work, it's not subjectivity in terms of, psychological or, but subjectivity of their presence and their bodies and, the individuality of them. I think that has been quite important for me, and that is also informed by the absence of workers and the working class in all historical accounts of the region. Yeah, I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah. Well, maybe also connected to this, and I'll just ask one more question, and then we can open it up. Is just how you thought about sound. You mentioned your sound recordist was the only other person with you along the shoot, and I'm curious how you thought about that aspect through your process, and just also when you sat down to edit and look at the material after the fact, how that just how sound, just how you thought differently maybe at that point about sound in relation to your images.
The idea was to benefit from what sound can offer, that, with camera and image you can frame what you see, but with sound, framing doesn't have that meaning, and the sound the sonic experience is always a little out of your control. And having that in mind, and not having a lot of production assets, we had one microphone that could, I mean more than one, but one of our microphones could record 4 channels, so that we can record sound from like the whole space. And having that material was informing us in editing, because the editing was not done only based on the image. A lot of times sound is also informing the cut and like how long we stay on one image or not. But having attention to the off-screen sound, or like the sound that is coming from other directions, was also informing the use of image.
Okay, we can start taking questions. If you have one, just raise your hand and a mic will come to you. Yep, right there.
Thank you for this beautiful film. My question was, what was the most challenging part in approaching the subject and the space and the location and the subjects that are in the film, the workers?
If I want to be very honest, it hasn't been very challenging. I think one thing is what I have learned and I've tried to do is how to approach my own positionality and how to make that kind of transparent in the environment in which I'm working with participants who are like they're not working for me, they're not being paid for, and it's also their very personal life. So I think a lot of that came through conversations with the participants, and I think they were quite. I mean, the ones that we see here were quite open to collaborate. Yeah.
I mean, given what you were saying about previous depictions of this region, I mean, was there any resistance at all at any point about what your intentions were, or even just gaining access to something like this facility that we see at the end?
Well, the access is complicated because you have to get permits, and for example, shooting on the trawler, it's not just shooting on the trawler, it's shooting on a body of water that is quite sensitive. The Gulf is quite sensitive. So you have to cross somehow, like checkpoints and army checkpoints, and just getting a permit to shoot on a trawler is quite complicated. But I mean, I think people were so generous and kind, and I think I've been also very affected by their generosity and kindness towards this work and the rest of it that is happening now. Yeah.
Have they had the opportunity to see the film? Have they seen the film yet?
Not all of it as a whole, but I also, as I told you, I went back. So for example, the translation of, because I don't speak Arabic, and the translation of the section on the trawler was done by one of the fishermen. So like, they have seen some of them and not all of them. They have seen parts of it, but I still didn't have a chance to bring the film back to them and offer it to them as a whole.
Yep, right there, and then we'll come to you next.
It's just a beautiful narrative. You talk about the subjectivity of those workers. I wonder, like, there are many ways to show the subjectivity, like why you choose the way that is not telling their personal stories, but just to observe, like being like just to be present and to show their daily life.
Thank you for saying that, and that's part of the reason I say the film doesn't contain everything it's even trying to contain. And I think labor and work has been probably I can't say the easier way, but the more possible way of creating encounters with the subjects, and these relationships are continuing and are growing. few weeks ago, I was listening to a webinar by Anna Grimshaw. She's an anthropologist and a filmmaker, and she was talking about multi-part filmmaking, which is kind of like a relief that, you know, like you can't and you should not put everything in one film. So I'm working on a second piece right now. It's with one worker inside the refinery. So of course it's another, you know, like community of workers, but everything that I have been learning in that region is helping me to very slowly and cautiously, very slowly getting into the stories, because I think storytelling can also be a little bit of a trap for me, because easily they can fall into certain way of representing people. And I'm very aware that I'm still an outsider. I mean, I'm from Iran, but I'm not from that region. Our relationship is someone who's coming from Tehran, which is the center, and people who are living in a smaller part of the country, in quote, periphery. I think I'm trying to be very careful about the way I'm using story, hopefully in the future.
I can sense your care for using.
There's a question in the middle here.
Thank you so much for your film. I'm very curious about these moments where there was dialogue but a black screen, which is very brave. It's sort of could be, you know, seen as a bit of a missed opportunity, but I'm sure there was a lot of thought behind that. So I was wondering what the choice meant for you.
Thank you for asking that. I think in the editing, in the structure, in the choice of material, I've been also trying to map what we see with my actual encounter. So it all started from the fact that most of those conversations are not sync conversations. I recorded them when the camera was off, you know, casual conversations that I had. And for a long time, and they have been important fragments that I thought their presence in the film can be informative in a way. And for a long time, I was not sure how to use them, because as soon as I put them on the image of someone working, then it just didn't feel right. And in a way was consuming an image, coupling it with something that I want to say, and it's very difficult to see what's the outcome of that. And towards the end, I just thought maybe using just a black screen can be a good option, because it's also it's also kind of like making a very clear distinction with the discursive, conversational, textual aspect of the film, in which I'm imposing a question to someone, and the images that our relationship has been very different. Our relationship was them working and moving, I'm also working and moving beside them. So I think it was a very different kind of relationship when I was shooting them and when I was in conversation with them. And I thought maybe making that very clear, putting those conversations on black screen can be kind of like a correct mapping of the two.
Yep.
Why did you call the film Scale?
Thank you for asking that question. That also came, of course, during the editing, because of the presence of the balance and how it disciplines the bodies that are working. And it's interesting because scale in English has multiple meanings, the scale of the fish and, you know, like the balance and, you know, like the scale size. And it's kind of like the same for the word Meezan, which is in Arabic, that has multiple meanings. I mean, it's not exactly the same, but it has multiple meanings. So I think Meezan or scale was something that became, again, another trajectory for me to look at my material, and I thought probably that's a good title.
It also comes up in the beginning of the film through a conversation. Was that something you shot early on?
Yeah, the constellation in the sky, that's also called Meezan. So yeah, that's another meaning. Thank you.
I think we're short on time, but if there is one last question, we can take it. Yep, right here.
Thank you for the film. I really enjoyed watching it. You mentioned your work as ethnographic several times, and I'm wondering if that's what informed the structure of the editing to move linearly through kind of the production of capturing the fish, realization on the kind of informal markets, and then kind of distribution within the processing site, rather than, so moving linearly rather than moving kind of back and forth through these sites.
I mean, it's difficult to say if the film is an ethnographic film, so it's mainly my work there is an ethnographic research that I'm doing, and this film is inspired by ethnographic approaches. So I really don't know if it exactly falls into the ethnographic definitions of a film. In one sense, I've been trying to respect the sensorial ethnographic approaches in works that has been done before, with attention to senses and how you can provoke senses of an environment with image and sound. And I mean, it's one way you can see it as a linear thing of, like the work places. But I mainly look at it as a trajectory, moving from the sea back to the land. And then, of course, it can also kind of like match the temporality that you're suggesting. But also like the return from the sea to the land was inspired by how this body of water, I think, brings together different communities and opens the space to think beyond the borders that defines it, and also beyond this geographical image of a void space between countries and between land. So and also the impact that it has on the life of communities there. And there's one part that someone mentions: when the Iran-Iraq war began, water was the way they could escape the. And that's it's not a very well-known story. Like, not many people know that water also has been the way to escape for some of the communities, because again, these are the communities that their story of war is also very absent in historical accounts. Most of the stories we hear is leaving the city with the roads through the land. But some communities, the native ones, they stayed much longer after the siege of the city, and there was a moment that they had to leave and there was no way to leave anymore. So they had to get on their trawlers and boats and embark on it and leave the city. Thank you so much. Yeah.